And we're back now with more from the first Fox News poll since the Paris attacks. 2/3 of registered voters we surveyed say President Obama hasn't been aggressive enough in fighting ISIS. 26% say he's been about right. 83% say it's very or somewhat likely Islamic terrorists will try to attack the U.S. soon. And 2/3 oppose the president's plan to take in 10,000 Syrian refugees over the next year. Which seems like a good time to bring in our Sunday group, syndicated columnist George Will, USA Today columnist Kirsten Powers, head of Heritage Action for America, Michael Needham, and Fox News political analyst Juan Williams. George, in the wake of the attacks this week by both ISIS in Europe and apparently an al-Qaeda affiliate in Mali, what are your thoughts about the terror threat and how effectively President Obama is handling it?
Well, the bombs go off and the massacres occur, and ISIS demonstrates an astonishing reach. And the president remains unshakable in his belief that our principal national security threat is climate change. And he dismisses what happens in Paris as a setback and promises an intensification, his word, of a strategy that's not working. And I don't take my word for it. Dianne Feinstein, the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, said, when the president said ISIS had been contained, she says, not contained, it's expanding. Yet Article 5 in NATO has not been invoked, which indicates that the French response, although initially forceful, may be episodic and fleeting.
We should just quickly say Article 5 of NATO, any member of NATO can invoke it, and it says an attack against one is an attack against all. And there had been some thought that France would basically call in the cavalry. They have not done that.
This matters because ISIS exists at the sufferance of NATO and the other powers in the world that are perfectly capable of sweeping it off the map of the Middle East. I should also say there's a story in the front page of the New York Times this morning that bids fair to become a real scandal. And it is that there's an investigation going on of CENTCOM, the Central Command, down in Tampa, as to whether or not intelligence was falsified to give a rosier view of the campaign against ISIS. The question in this town in a couple weeks could be, what did we not know, and when did we not know it, and whose fault was that?
People are understandably frightened by what's going on in Paris and in Mali. But this week, the head of the FBI, James Comey, tried to reassure Americans. Here he is.
We are not aware of any credible threat here of a Paris-type attack, and we have seen no connection at all between the Paris attackers and the United States.
Kirsten, given the very different barriers, very different obstacles for outsiders, like the Paris bombers getting into Europe as opposed to getting into this country, are we safer than they are in Europe?
I think we are safer, but that doesn't mean we're safe. So those are two different things. And so we're relatively safer. It doesn't mean they can't get into our country. Obviously, we know terrorists can get into our country. We've seen it happen. I think in terms of they obviously have the migrant crisis right in front of them. I mean, it's not something that's literally crushing against us the way it is against them. But one thing I would say on that is that the Manhattan Institute actually has a study out about how in the United States, something that I think most of us would probably think already, Muslim immigrants tend to assimilate much better than they do in Europe, and that is also part of the problem in Europe they have, which is that they are not assimilating. The Muslim migrants are not assimilating.
Well, that brings us to the next topic, because the debate over how to confront ISIS quickly morphed this week into a fierce debate over how to handle the Syrian refugees, and President Obama seemed almost eager to call out Republicans. Take a look.
These are the same folks oftentimes who suggest that they're so tough that just talking to Putin or staring down ISIL or using some additional rhetoric somehow is going to solve the problems out there. But apparently they're scared of widows and orphans.
Michael, given that in that Fox poll we just released, 2/3 of Americans say that they oppose President Obama's continued determination to allow up to 10,000 Syrian refugees in. The question I have is, why does he seem so eager to have this fight, especially given the fact that in the House vote on tightening restrictions on allowing Syrian refugees in, 47 Democrats broke with the president and voted for the Republican plan?
Yeah, it's not a good fight for him to have. Look, America's an
He seems to want to have it, though.
America's an extraordinarily compassionate nation where we accept 50% in 2013. We accepted 67% of the world's refugees. Compassion doesn't require being stupid, however, and I think going through, making sure that Congress is vetting the vetting process to allow these people in is absolutely common sense. When you look at Bowling Green, where 2 terrorists who came in from Iraq, where we have pretty good records, came in, they were vetted, it turns out that they were terrorists. When you look at the Boston bomber, who was a refugee 17 years ago, got radicalized while in America, there are valid concerns to have about refugee programs, making sure that we're not letting in an ISIS terror in that program. And if the president wants to have that debate, I think it's a debate that we're happy to have, and as Ted Cruz said, he should come back and make some of these claims to people's face. Let's have the debate.
We ask you for questions for the panel, and we got this on Twitter from a fellow calling himself Bomb Doc. He writes, so we can't locate 11 million illegal immigrants in our country, but we can vet thousands from the remote regions of Syria. Juan, how do you answer him, and doesn't he have a point?
I don't think he has a point at all, Chris. I mean, Bomb Doc is creating a false equivalence, in my mind, a false equivalence born of legitimate concerns. As Michael was saying, there are legitimate concerns in the aftermath of Paris and 9/11. But what you have to understand is it's being combined at this moment with the politics, and especially politics that is so anti-immigrant, almost to the point of xenophobic. It's becoming hysterical, all this fear. What we have is a situation where you can vet people. We have had in this country, you know, the reality is, you know, thousands of people now admitted since 9/11, and we've only had the 3, Michael was just citing them, instances where people have been in refugees tied to acts of anything that could be considered terrorism. In fact, the Attorney General Loretta Lynch said we have a robust screening process that's worked. I think it's more robust than anything we have for the tourist or the student visas or people who have a passport from France or Germany just come into this country. So the situation now is you're talking about, since 2011, the Syrians that have been admitted here, half of them are children, a quarter are adults over the age of 60, fingerprinted, photographed, interviewed, biometrics. I mean, I don't think it's anything to be compared to some Mexicans coming over the border looking for a job.
Quickly, Michael, how would you respond to that?
Well, look, I think as Senator Rubio said, obviously in some cases with children, it's easy to let them in. There's a difference between screening people from Syria, where we don't have the types of records that we have from other countries like Iraq, where we've had a relationship with the government. And so I think making sure that we have a system in place that can screen people, and if you don't have records, aren't letting those people in, is absolutely common sense, and that's all anyone's calling for.
All right. We have to take a break here, but we'll see you a little bit later.